It is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He is George. And, for a week, it looked like we were going to talk about men's basketball to lead off the show, but no, Ohio State.
We don't know what we're talking about with that, so we can't possibly lead off with that.
We're stupid. But
are we though?
Well, I'm just stupid.
More sentient than anyone else.
So the plan was we're going to talk about men's basketball and bloviate our way through, a half hour of analysis. And instead, Ohio State decided, and specifically, I guess, Ryan Day decided to hire Matt Patricia to come in and be co-defensive coordinator. And I am just so excited about this development. And to talk about it with you, George, because look, in the pantheon of dumb hires, right? And there's been many in the past 20 or so years. There's a lot of different reasons why you could say a hire was bad, right? One case would be one man only. His only qualifications were that he was the best man at Urban Meyer's wedding, right? That was his best qualification, I guess I should say. I wouldn't say his only qualification, probably his best qualification. In other cases, you had a sentient walrus that was calling Dave 15 times a game. So my point is that there's a wide variety of reasons why someone might make a stupid hire. I don't really know why Ryan Day decided to hire Matt Patricia, but I do not like it. I think it is bad. And I've heard a lot of people kind of try to equivocate on this and say, we got to give it a chance. This guy's got a lot of experience, blah, blah, blah. And again, I can't see the future, and I would love to be wrong about all of this. But as we will get into shortly, I think this is a very poor hire that is going to bite Ohio State in the butt. And I don't know. I mean, how do you feel before we get into the whys and wherefores? How are you feeling? What's your initial gut reaction to that?
I was conflicted at first. I mean, I was very conflicted when it was announced that he was even a candidate, because it did kind of come out of left field. It did feel like it was a reflection. I can't remember who made the point to us initially, but I did think it was a good one that was brought up when it was like when Brett Venables opted to make himself the defensive play caller for Oklahoma again this offseason. That seemed like a pretty damning reflection of what the market for defensive coordinators was after Jim Knowles got scooped up by Penn State. So it kind of stands to reason that whoever was going to fill the gap left by Knowles, it was probably going to come out of left field. And we weren't necessarily enthused with the candidates we were hearing to begin with. I know Oregon's defensive coordinator, or was it their defensive or offensive coordinator that had been brought up? Actually, now I'm struggling to recall. But I know that the guy that a lot of people thought it was going to be was the guy from Pitt that had previous ties to Ohio.
They were also talking about the Chiefs' defensive line coach.
Right.
Didn't pan out. Colin, I think, is his name.
Yeah. But Patricia was certainly out of left field. But, on a very general level, I think that a lot of people, and this is one of the things that I've kind of used to talk myself into this, so to speak. I think a lot of the criticisms that people had or are having of this Patricia hire, I think the people that were critical of the Chip Kelly hire last year, there were some similarities in terms of this guy being an NFL washout and somebody that who had their most recent results in football more reflected in the results they had as a head coach than the success that they had as a coordinator. And a lot of times it's just a situation where a person is more suited for that support coordinator role than they are for the authority that comes with being a head coach. It was totally justified in the case of Chip Kelly, as we not only saw this past season with the success that Ohio State ultimately reached, but then also Chip Kelly going back to the NFL and now being the highest paid offensive coordinator in the league.
Right.
He was not a good NFL coach. He was a fairly decent coach for Oregon football while he was there.
He was fantastic.
but the two successors I believe they've had since him both got to national championships, where I don't believe he got to one. And maybe was I actually he might have gone. Did the year that Auburn won, they played Oregon, right? I think in the title game.
That's possible. I can't remember that one off the top of my head.
Okay, so I might be misspeaking there, but the point is, he Chip was fine in his first stint at Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't do great in the NFL, a little bit better with the Eagles than with the 49ers, but the 49ers was a total disaster. Went back to UCLA, really wasn't even that great at UCLA. And coming over from UCLA, being a head coach there, to taking a lesser job when he didn't necessarily need to at what was a better program, people thought it was kind of a weird step back and were skeptical of, based on the recent results that Kelly had, that he was going to be cut out for it. And he still ended up being a NFL reclamation project that turned into a successful coordinator for Ohio State. And certainly it's a different case than Patricia, in the sense that Kelly was someone that had a history with Ryan Day in football before. So there's certainly ways that you can say it's more of a special case, but on a general level, they have had success with taking this type of person that has had success at higher levels of football and translating that into success for this program. So that can at least make you feel a little bit better, I think, of taking a candidate like that and plugging them into the staff. Now it's a different side of the ball. And again, this isn't somebody that has the built-in history with Ryan Day that Chip Kelly did. But again, speaking on a very general level, I think that can make you at least feel like there's some method to this madness, particularly given the other candidates. And Matt, I'm just using that as a phrase.
I know. But
I'm much less critical of this hire than you are, but I understand where the skepticism comes from, because I was plenty skeptical when it was even announced that he was a candidate. But I've grown into talking myself a little bit more into it as a coach. And I have more thoughts, but I'd like to hear more
let's talk about
from you.
So here's the deal. So you talked a lot about Chip Kelly. Let's talk about Matt Patricia, right? Let's talk about the guy who actually got hired here, because the thing about this guy is that if you had hired him right out of, the Patriots, right? Or right after that first stint with the Patriots, and you're like, oh my God, this is incredible. This would be the most amazing hire ever. I can't believe.
Yeah, but that's not realistic. I mean,
no, it's not.
You don't go from a Super Bowl winning defensive coordinator to a college defensive coordinator.
But that's my point, because what he did instead was he went from being the defensive coordinator for the New England Patriots for about 5 years, right, to then going to the Detroit Lions. And it's not just that he was a failure as the Detroit Lions head coach. It's that he not only was really bad at that job, but players hated his guts, right? This is a guy who had the locker room in near mutiny by the time that he left. They were openly insubordinate of him. There was all kinds of backbiting and things that he was saying. He was hostile with the media during that time. It was just it was an unmitigated disaster. I don't know what else you can really say to describe his tenure with Detroit.
He totally ruined the decades long success that the Detroit Lions franchise had been
proud
before.
Name.
Yeah, before Jim Campbell.
Yeah, so
Dan Campbell.
Yeah, rather. So it was really, really bad with the Lions. He went back on with the Patriots for a couple years. Not like essentially as an offensive coordinator kind of role, went really terribly, ends up with the Eagles in 2023, kind of towards the end of the season, to try to help their defense. They get worse. And my point is,
they had a pretty good Super Bowl, didn't they?
They had a pretty good Super Bowl after he left. Yes.
They ruined the Super Bowl for us, if memory serves.
Yeah. After he left. So my point is,
I don't think he really had an impact one way or the other.
Probably not. But my point is that he has not succeeded in his primary vocation since basically 2017. And the argument that I think a lot of people have been making is that, first of all, this guy hasn't shown the juice at any of these other stops since then in the past 8 years. Chip Kelly, for whatever his faults were as a head coach, like, this is a guy who took Zach Charbonnet, who was a terrible running back at Michigan, and turned him into one of the best running backs in the country at UCLA. He was always an innovative offensive mind. That's what you were hiring at Ohio State. I don't know what the hell Ryan Day is hiring from Matt Patricia, because we haven't seen him do that since literally 2017 in an effective way. And the argument that people are making is that, okay, if your most effective years as a coach were under Bill Belichick, one of the greatest defensive coaching minds in history, then how much of it was your talent versus being able to work with this legend of a coach? And so there is a lot of skepticism on my part. My biggest thing really is honestly the interpersonal stuff, the way the Detroit locker room collapsed as he was head coach, the way he had horrible interactions with the media. I think more than any level of big time, football, I think the college level, you have to be able to form relationships. And I don't understand what the overall goal is here. I know that I agree with you when you say that, like, the defensive coaching pool was pretty thin, right, in this offseason. I agree with that. But you can find somebody. You can find somebody who does not have the kind of baggage that Matt Patricia carries with him going into this job. So I am very skeptical about this.
I would feel worse about the baggage if it were actually tied to his time as a defensive coordinator. The reality is the guy was a pretty successful defensive coordinator, and maybe it was under a coach that you could make the argument he was riding the coattails of. Mm-hmm. But the way that I would look at it is he feels like somebody that is not tied down to playing one system, that he doesn't necessarily have to do things his way in order to succeed. He is going to make the best of what's available, what's going to most be suitable and conducive to success based on the players that he has around him. And I think that that's something that, with the position Ohio State is in, where even though they're having all these players that are leaving for the NFL, they still do have key core contributors that are returning next season, such as Caleb Downs. They are in a position where they need somebody who is not going to try to fit square pegs into round holes or take a long time to make their system work. He is somebody that is going to be able to come in, recognize what parts of the team are good, which parts need improvement, and is going to be able to build from there in terms of making the most out of the group that is coming back next year. I think it's probably reasonable to say that there's going to be a drop-off from Knowles just because they were one of the best units in the country last year, and they are losing, frankly, a lot of talent in different places to the NFL, and it's not going to be easy to have those shoes filled. But I feel like this was a good way to at least, I don't want to say outright stop the bleeding, but make the best of what could otherwise be a bad situation if you tried to bring in somebody else that wanted to do things their way and might not necessarily make the most of the talent that is going to be there. The other thing that I'll say relative to relationships is, and this is just kind of my read, but it feels like this team's success with recruiting is much more contingent on their positional assistants than it is on their coordinators.
I would agree with that.
Chip Kelly, I know he was doing some nice courtesy visits right before he went off to the Raiders and was doing some visible, but I honestly cannot recall any sort of like aggressive recruiting on behalf of Jim Knowles during the 3 or 4 years that he was at Ohio State.
Yeah, he didn't.
It always felt like it was much more Larry Johnson. We've been saying Tim Walton for a long time is easily the second
he's the defensive
best
equivalent of Brian Hartline. I mean,
right.
He's doing the yeoman's work.
Right. So the fact that you've still got those components here, and now Tim Walton is going to be co-defensive coordinator.
Well, I wanted to ask
Walton
you about
has
that too.
1 year of experience working with Matt Patricia before, albeit in a position where Patricia had far less authority on the other side of the ball than what Walton had at Syracuse.
Right.
They were both from the Paul Pasqualoni, or however you say his name, coaching tree. They are brothers.
The legendary coaching tree.
They are brothers in that regard. So.
Yeah, brothers in arms. So that's the question I actually was going to ask you next, because this is kind of more of a macro concern that I have of this coaching staff. It feels like there's a lot of co in all the titles that I'm seeing. You know what I mean? And even if it's in the case of like Brian Hartline, who ostensibly is the offensive coordinator, you still have a rushing game coordinator that he's coordinating with. You have a passing game coordinator that he is coordinating with. And then you've got the co-DCs. You've got guys who are in charge of various things beyond.
Well, the last time this team had co-DCs, it worked out great, didn't it?
Well, I mean,
Kerry Coombs and Matt Barnes.
Kerry Coombs and Barnes, are the obviously, have gone on to win Super Bowls and be the name faces of defense in their sport. No, but that's my point.
Kerry Coombs doing snow angels in the confetti at Super Bowl.
That's right. No, but that's my point. I'm not saying that you can't make something like that work, but what I am saying is that when you have a really young team going through a lot of transition, you need to have cohesive offensive and defensive philosophies, because you're losing so much senior leadership. To me, it seems like you're going to have so many cooks, trying to just throw everything in all at once. That's not a recipe for success. Pardon the extended pun. I just think it's too many people trying to give their input when really you want to have a singular vision. Now, the opposite thing here would be, okay, maybe Ryan Day's doing that on purpose because he wants to do the Jim Tressel thing and just do everything himself, which fine. If if you can be Jim Tressel and be a witch, that's fine. I don't think many people beyond Jim Tressel are capable of doing that. But does that concern you at all, that you have so many guys who are kind of segmenting these responsibilities?
I mean, kind of, but here's what I'll say about that. They feel like they're in a position where Hartline has been, and I hate using this word because it has developed very negative connotations, but they feel like they have groomed Hartline for this role as the offensive coordinator at this point, in a way that they probably didn't feel like he was ready for before they went and brought in Chip Kelly. So what I have to wonder, if that, and again, it's, I'm drawing comparisons from two different sides of the ball, so it's not a perfect comparison, but if the offense continues to click this upcoming season, then it stands to reason that bringing Hartline along in the co-offensive coordinator role was good in terms of prepping him for success under Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, where they were able to develop him into being comfortable in that role, and then he runs with it towards being successful in that position. Mm-hmm. If that works out, then there's more reasonable doubt you can lend to that strategy of having co-pilots, but having the more senior guy between the two of those co-pilots really run the show, so that the younger co-pilot can eventually take over when the older co-pilot gets the opportunity to inevitably go back to the NFL. Yeah. That's kind of the path that I feel like Ohio State ideally wants to chart with the defense now too. They're gonna give Patricia his chance to restore his image, and if he's successful after 1 or 2 years here, he will then go back to the NFL in some capacity for another highly paid defensive coordinator role somewhere. Mm-hmm. And then Walton will take over as full-time coordinator after he's picked up the ropes from Patricia. That's what I feel like they probably want to do in this situation.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to work out.
Sure.
But
and I think
if it does work out on the offensive side of the ball, it stands to reason that bringing along the chain of command like that can work in another part of the staff. So I'm willing to be patient and see if it does work out. I have no reason to believe it's not going to work out on offense. Defense, it's a different side of the ball. It's not Ryan Day's specialty. It could be a different story.
Right. And I agree with you that that's probably their intention. I do think a lot about 2015 and how chaotic Ohio State was in that case on the offensive side of the ball, where you had coaches who weren't talking to each other, who were afraid to communicate with Urban Meyer, to have those kind of discussions because the staff didn't mesh well and there were just too many voices in the same room. And ultimately
people believed in Cardale.
Well, yeah. And ultimately that's what led to Ryan Day getting hired, right? Is that they needed to have somebody who had a vision and could be that singular voice and to create something out of that. And, offensively, like you said, I'm not that worried about it because Ryan Day is still there and he's still very, very good at what he did. I think we're starting to get a clearer picture about what happened after the Oregon game last year. And Ryan Day really did step in and start to kind of handle some things that weren't being handled on the defensive side of the ball. But last year you had overwhelming talent that could mitigate some of the issues that you might see. And then you had the opportunity to work your way through it. I don't know that they're necessarily going to have that in 2025. Now I'm not predicting some disaster of the season or anything like that. They still have tons of talent. They still have, a lot of, really good players and honestly, a lot of really good coaches. I love Walton, right? Brian Hartline's a smart guy. Ryan Day's a smart guy. I'm not worried about that as in terms of the team falling apart or anything like that. But I do think you're going to see a lot of interesting friction in ways that we did not see this past season. And then, in subsequent seasons before that, because it's just, it's one of those things where I just believe that football is a game that's predicated on consistency and vision and having that kind of you want to know who you're supposed to be. Right. And to me, that's really, really important in football. And
you don't think Patricia and Larry Johnson are going to be best buddies?
No, I don't.
Right off
no, frankly, no, I don't. I don't know how those personalities are going to mesh, and it's going to be wild to see how that all plays out. So, yeah, and that Larry Johnson is a whole other. I mean, he's another X factor in all of this. Nobody knows how much longer he's going to stick around. They don't know what it's going to look like in terms of his voice in that room. Is it contingent on him having a co-equal say in some of this stuff? So I don't know. We'll see how it plays out, but I think it's going to be really interesting no matter what that looks like. So we'll talk more about that as it evolves. And we're going to, especially as we get into spring practice here in a few weeks, you'll see some of the fruits of that, I think, maybe going into April. Let's go ahead and do Ask Us Anything. Before we do that, I want to remind you that the Dubcast is sponsored by the Dry Goods Store at 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers, all kinds of great stuff. drygoods.11warriors.com. We got some new stuff for the championship, so you should check it out and then buy them. All right, so let's do Ask Us Anything. You can ask us anything by sending us questions to dubcast@11warriors.com. Let's start with an accusatory question from Kevin. Why don't you cover wrestling instead of men's basketball and maybe women's basketball? Wrestling's interesting. Wrestling's one of those sports. I mean, first of all, I love wrestling, and I don't think we should poo-poo it. It is something that, obviously has a big presence in Ohio State in general, but I also think it's one of those things that requires someone with kind of the knowledge and the ability and know-how to do that. And we've had some great writers and some great commentators at 11 Warriors in the past for that, but it's also one of those things where it's just a resources thing at a certain point. And but with that said, here at the Dubcast, I do think we can can and should start talking about it a little bit more because it's a great sport. I love wrestling. I think it's awesome. I don't know. Do you get into the college game, George, at all?
No.
I
wait for the wrestlers to wash out and then pivot to MMA.
There we go.
Start paying attention.
There you go. Nice. I will say, and I've said this before in the Dubcast, that I think folk style wrestling is the only true Midwestern art form. I do love the idea that every kind of culture has developed its own wrestling style. And I do think it's really cool that we have this folk style wrestling style in the Midwest. And that's something that is authentically like a Midwestern kind of thing. So I really do think that's cool. And I don't know. Ohio is a great wrestling state. So I appreciate you bringing it up. So next one here. This is from Alvin. What is the best vegetable? Our good friend Alvin. Sorry, I shouldn't.
You go first. I know what I'm gonna say.
I'm gonna say broccoli.
Got a funny story.
I say broccoli's the best vegetable.
Great.
So
that's my second answer.
Okay, so broccoli. Here's my reason why. Okay, first of all, I like it. I personally think it tastes good. I enjoy it steamed. I like it raw. You dip it in some ranch. Tastes delicious. It's versatile. You can put it in soups. You can like bake it. You can make it all crispy. It tastes delicious. I think. And here's the other thing. So I love tomatoes. Like if you ask me what my actual favorite fruit is, or not fruit, I guess technically tomatoes are a fruit, but they're considered vegetables. I would say tomatoes, bar none. I love tomatoes. They're delicious. I'll eat. But nutritionally, this is why broccoli is the best versus my favorite. Nutritionally, broccoli is like unbelievably good for you. So broccoli's super high up there. That's my number one. I think it's the best vegetable.
Yeah, I think the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing children that broccoli's bad.
Oh my gosh. It's great. And my son, by the way, loves broccoli. He shoves that stuff in his face all the time. He thinks it's awesome.
If you cook it right, you season it right, just like any other vegetable.
That's right.
You grill it, doesn't even have to be grilled. If you just, put it in the oven, if you cook it and season it right, it's great.
I agree.
When I haven't been eating great this winter. I'm trying to get back on my my regimen here in the coming months. But when I'm on it, what I'm normally only eating during the week is quinoa and carrots and broccoli.
I love so
broccoli is
too,
my
man.
number 2. Carrots is my number 1.
They're great.
And I was not like for the first 3 years of my life, I'm treating them just like any other kid treats vegetables, but one of my favorite things that I like, or stories that I like looking back on as a kid was, I was for a while I was best friends with this girl I grew up across the street from, and one day we had just built a fence in my yard, like a white picket fence, and so we were all like playing over in our yard and whatever.
I feel like this is how Tom Sawyer starts, like literally.
Well, here's where I'm going for relative to vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember how it got brought up, but it was saying something about carrots. And then she told me, she said, if you eat a lot of carrots, you'll have really good eyesight. And I was like, is that true? So I'm like 4 years old. I'm like, that sounds like some bullshit. Like, is that true? She looked at me and she like nodded her head really hard, like it was the most certain thing in the world to her. And I just remember saying after that, like, if it's really that easy, you'll just have good eyesight if you eat carrot. I literally said, I'm gonna eat every carrot I see.
Yeah.
And she thought that was so funny. And you know what's so crazy, Johnny?
What is
I am
crazy?
The only person in my family that doesn't wear glasses.
Wow.
Mom or dad's side.
Now
the optometrists don't understand it. I have 20/20 vision. Everybody else in my family has glasses, and I'm thoroughly convinced it's because my childhood friend told me eat a lot of carrots, and that's exactly what I did. Well, and that's why carrots are my favorite vegetable.
I'll tell you something. I do love carrots. I love absolutely. I do not like steamed carrots. I think they taste like butt. I just like raw carrots, and I'll eat just gobs of them.
If you cook carrots correctly, they're undefeated. They're the best vegetable.
Here's the thing. So I've eaten carrots my entire life. I just like the tactile, just crunch. I just like anything that I can just really.
They're good raw
crunch.
Too.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel with cucumbers. I love cucumbers, but again, they're like 99% water, so I can't, they're not going to be up there as best vegetable.
Carrots are plenty watery too.
That's true, but carrots have all that vitamin C. They're very good for you. My point is that I've been eating carrots my entire life, and I've got like -10.5 vision in one eye and -11 vision in the other eye. So I don't know what's going on with that. Maybe I just didn't eat enough.
You didn't eat every carrot you saw, like That's true. Said I would and did.
That's true. I didn't live up to the example that you said.
I went full Bugs Bunny mode for the rest of my life from then on, and it paid dividends.
Well, there you go. All right, last one here. This is from Matt in Minneapolis. Not much as so much a question as it is a statement. I emailed you guys the day that Holtman was sent packing, saying that Bruce Pearl would be the best choice. Pearl's NCAA issues were poo-pooed, and really, they almost all involve things that are now within the rules. Given the fact that OSU has the most resources to work with, there's no reason why they should be this inconsistent. Say what you will about Pearl, but he's a hell of a coach. I love that you. First of all, I love the fact that you have brought this up again after like a year. That's incredible. I love that. I love that you have hung on to this for so long. And I'm not saying you're wrong either, because Bruce Pearl, he had a lot of success at Tennessee. And we're going to talk about Ohio State men's basketball here in a second, and maybe consider it. But would you? I guess that's the question that I have then, George. Let's not talk Dusty May versus Jake Diebler. Would you have taken Bruce Pearl over Jake Diebler? No. Wow. Dang. So Matt is going to have to hang on to this for another year.
Yes.
And then we'll see where we're at in 2026. And then if we can just do this until Bruce Pearl's like 85.
He's one of those guys that's just like a parody of himself. I can't take him seriously.
Bruce Pearl really seems like he should be on The Sopranos, like as a bit player. You know what I mean? Like he just seems like kind of a skeezy, like, he's
all the members of the Italian college basketball coaching mafia that would fit that description, and you go with Bruce Pearl.
Well, there's a lot, but I'm just saying in general, he fits that descriptor. I think he just kind of strikes me as that kind of guy. But it is interesting that there are some of these coaches who we've vilified in the past. They're essentially like, it's endorsed now what they did. Like, that's what you're supposed to do now as a coach. So I find that kind of interesting, and I'm glad Matt brought that up. So that's Ask Us Anything for this week. Thank you guys for sending those questions. Let's talk about some basketball. Ohio State men's basketball beat the crap out of Washington. Could not miss. They were just, bucket. They win by 100 points. And then today, I'm recording this on Sunday, they have an incredibly exciting game back and forth with Michigan. It goes down to the wire. They've got a jumper to try to win it with Thornton. He airballs it at
Not even
the
a
end.
Jumper, a floater, like less than 10 feet from the basket.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. But despite that really bad final attempt, kind of leaving a bad taste in her mouth, I think Ohio State went toe-to-toe with Michigan, despite a lot of turnovers at bad times, despite going cold at various points in the game, and they took them right down to the wire. So I guess my point with all this is that if you were expecting this to be some kind of like verdict on Dusty May versus Jake Diebler, I don't think you got it.
It was for me.
It was the 3-point loss. That's what did it. 3-point loss with a chance to go into OT.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I mean, I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but this got to feel like the 5th time this year that they've lost to a ranked team by very
single
a
digits,
basket. Yeah. I mean, it's tough to see, and it's hard to look at where Michigan is and not there's no
especially
doubt,
given how bad they were last year, because Michigan was atrocious.
Yeah, they were literally bottom of the conference last year, and they completely turned it around with this hire, and now they're going to be probably one of the most dangerous teams in the tournament based on the fact that they're just a matchup nightmare for pretty much anybody with the kind of talent that and depth that they have in their front court.
Yeah.
I I don't like, they were always going to be a bad matchup for Ohio State. And it was reflected in what happened with the rebounding battle today.
I was about to bring that up.
45-29 on the glass. And frankly, I mean, and there were so many times where it was like, if you just get a board there, does that take away second chance points from Michigan that end up turning this into a win for you?
Mm-hmm.
So Michigan is going to give a lot of teams. I mean, the best teams in the tournament are always the ones that have, really solid guard play. And I'm not totally convinced that Michigan has that, but they're still going to give a lot of teams matchup problems just by virtue of having a big, deep front court.
Yeah, you've got two legit 7-footers. I mean, that's going to be hard for anybody, at least in the first couple of rounds to contend with. I mean, that's rough.
Yeah. And I can't help but wonder how much better of a position would Ohio State be in if they had hired May than if they did what they considered to be I wouldn't even say the safer option, just flat out the cheaper option, and kept Diebler, promoting him from interim.
Yeah.
It's the other thing that really, I thought was damning today relative to the Diebler-May argument was, I mean, I've been very critical of Roddy Gale, from the time he was at Ohio State to, being glad to see him on the other side of the ball today, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, he's been a better NIL acquisition for that team than, frankly, pretty much any of the way that Ohio State used its NIL stuff this year, other than for maybe Parrish was the guy that came over from San Diego State.
I think
Is that
so,
right? Yeah. Okay. So Parrish has worked out reasonably well.
Yeah, Parrish has done great.
Yeah, but the two biggest guys that they acquired from the portal in Bradshaw and Michi, I mean,
Bradshaw was tragic. He was really bad.
Michi hasn't been on the court, and Bradshaw can't stay on the court because he fouls out after only playing 11 minutes.
Right.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
And you look at how Michigan was able to use the portal with May, and it's just two totally different worlds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for me to look at what happened. Today was going to be a very, very important decider of that narrative, and it stinks that Ohio State lost in the fashion that they did, as close as they did. But the reality is they still lost, and that's really all that people are going to remember from this is that which team lost. It's great that they played a lot of good teams very close this season, but they lost a lot of those games. And now they're in a position where if they lose 2 of these last 5 games, 3 of which are road games, and they've not been a good road team, which is kind of a carryover from the Holtman era.
Mm-hmm.
They're better. I mean, granted, they're a better conference road team, at least under Diebler, than they've been under Holtman, but still not. It's not like there's been a major turnaround in that area or anything. And I mean, Holtman was had lost 18 in a row on the road in conference or so. It's like,
it'd be hard not to be better.
Yeah. It's like, you got nowhere to go from up at that point.
Yeah.
If they lose 2 of these next 5 games, you can't be totally confident. Now, we're not going to name names, but it was very funny that last week there were a lot of people that said, this must be your first time talking hoops if you don't think Ohio State is a lock for the tournament. They were 85% last week when people said that. And now, after losing to Michigan, they are 12% less likely to make the tournament. So
if they lose another game, it'll be a coin flip. And I think that's the issue here is that
they might lose another 2 because 3 of them are road games. Right. And they got to play Nebraska at home, who they already lost to once.
And Indiana on the road in their last game.
And right under Ohio State in terms of likelihood to make the tournament is Nebraska. So it's not like Nebraska's a slouch and a gimme just because
they'll be motivated.
It's a home game for them.
Yeah, and they'll be motivated to try to take it to Ohio State. So that they have work to do, and you can't have like Mahavy doing nothing. I mean, Bradshaw fouling out with 9 minutes left in the game. That's after only playing 11 minutes.
5,000 11 minutes is
crazy. That's not even
in a game where your front court depth is already limited.
Oh
that's not excusable, frankly.
Yeah, and honestly, the fact that the rest of the team was able to pick up the slack and even stay in the game with some of those deficiencies is kind of amazing, because they do have, like, on any given day, they'll have guys who like will step up and like play. Devin Royal played really, really well.
Yeah, I thought it was
played
funny
really, really well
when the booth was talking to Diebler before the game. They were like, how are you gonna mitigate like Wolf and Golden and the front court depth that Michigan has? And he talked about how he said, we're gonna go small deliberately just to kind of try to attack them with more speed than it. And I was like, I wonder how much of that we're going to go small mentality is just Diebler knowing ahead of time that Bradshaw is going to foul out very early, because two more talented big men are just going to give him fits and put him in foul trouble.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, that's the plan because that's the only plan. So that's just what's going to happen.
We would like to play. We would like to avoid going small, but we're probably going to have to do it anyway.
But we really can't. So, I'm with you. I think they should have gotten Dusty May. Ohio State would have been in a better position, just personnel wise and depth wise, because Dusty May ended up bringing a lot of guys over. And it is kind of remarkable what he's been able to do with Michigan. I mean, they're at the top of the Big Ten after being at the bottom of the Big Ten. That's significant. That's a big deal. I do think, I mean, not to crap on Diebler like too much, I think that he has in general done a pretty good job, considering this is his first stop and whatnot, but this isn't supposed to be a learn on the job kind of situation, right? Like, this is something where you're like, you should be beating this Michigan team, which is a good team, but not a great team. And you were right there at the end. And clearly, if you had like, a big that didn't just like immediately leave the game, that you might have had a chance, on the boards even. So stuff like that can be frustrating.
It's not like I'm calling for his job or anything.
No.
I just think this is more of a reflection of what we said immediately after the hire, which was May should have been the guy.
Yeah. And with that said, I mean, they make the tournament. I still consider that a success. I still think that if they make the tournament, that is a huge W for Diebler, and it sets them up well, going into the future. So there is definitely some positives that they can still take away from this season. I just think that some of the things that we were, I guess my point is that shouldn't take away from the fact that there's still some things from the Holtman tenure that continue to persist even now, and that's frustrating. And I think that's fair for people to be a little irritated by. Okay, so a few other things that we're going to talk about here before we get out of here. First of all, just a couple of random things. Women's basketball survived a really tough challenge. They're now, I think, a projected 4 seed. So if you want to check that, that's nice. Good for them. Glad they're still in it. They've been falling off
water
a little bit. 15 Ohio
you previously said anything less than a Final Four appearance would be a disappointment. Are you still sticking to that based on this late slide?
Yes, I am saying that because they were like really, really good at the start of the season, and I feel like they've lost focus a little bit. We'll see what happens in the Big Ten tournament, but yeah, they need to try to make a Final Four. They have the talent to do it. 15 Ohio State players are invited to the NFL Combine. That's funny to me. That's I think it's like a record or something. I don't know. It's a lot. It's the most this year. Georgia and Texas both had 14, but Ohio State, everybody's showing up, including all of these names are people you would expect: Quinshon Judkins, Donovan Jackson, Seth McLaughlin, Jack Sawyer, et cetera, et cetera. So no big surprises there. Pretty much all your favorite Buckeyes. This is obviously a huge item of note. The senator is now the lieutenant governor. So Jim Tressel,
that was kind of out of left field, right?
Yeah, well, so it's funny because Jim Tressel has advocated for political things in the past, but he was never really seen as a big political figure. so what happened was obviously J.D. Vance, one of Ohio's senators, ends up becoming the vice president. That means that the governor of Ohio then appoints J.D. Vance's successor, which, well, or at least the person to fill that spot, which was his current or previous Lieutenant Governor Houston, who steps in. And then now, of course, you need a lieutenant governor, and that is now James Patrick Tressel. So I find that really like it's an insane occurrence, but I don't think it's an unexpected one. I think if you ask people, during Jim Tressel's tenure, if he would enter into politics, I think people are like, oh, that tracks. That makes sense. My favorite part about all of this was Terrell Pryor showing up at his swearing in with the framed jersey. And then my favorite thing was Terrell Pryor putting out on social media, was like, I gave this to him before he got sworn in, so it's not an illegal contribution. So I enjoy that quite a bit. That was great. And hey, man, if he runs for governor at some point, which I don't know, he's in his 70s, who knows if he actually wants to do that. But if he does, he's getting like 85% of the vote in the state. That would be a landslide. So we'll see what he does. And here's the thing, though, man, he's not a college football coach anymore. He's a politician. And so I do hope that people treat him as such, instead of, doing the like, well, Tommy Tuberville, you're in the Senate now, buddy. I guess we'll just go Auburn. Like,
I think Tressel is a little bit more low key in his commentary than Tuberville is.
I actually think, and I also think he's much more intelligent, because that dude is a moron. Anyway, so but no, Jim Tressel, I think he'll serve that role with distinction. I think he'll do a great job, and it'll be really interesting to see where it goes from here. So who knows? Last thing that I want to say here real quick, we do want to say RIP and give our condolences to the families of both Ben Christman, a former offensive lineman for Ohio State. He had transferred to UNLV, and former Ohio State captain Jim Karsatos. He died at 61. Obviously, both at very different stages in their lives, but very sad that both of them passed away. And, our best wishes to their families. That's the thing, honestly, the thing about Ohio State and, covering this and talking about it is kind of remarkable how close knit a lot of these, these teams are and these families are. And I know that they'll have a lot of support amongst the Ohio State fans, the Ohio State community. And that's one positive takeaway from this, is that love, that support will always be there. So best wishes to all of those, all the families affected, all of those relatives and friends and family members. We're definitely thinking of you guys.
Well said.
So that is the Dubcast for this week. It's a shorter one. We couldn't, complain about Matt Patricia for, indefinitely. So we had.
Well, you could have.
I could have.
I had to reel you in a little bit.
That's right. But we'll be back next week to talk about all of this, comings and goings of Ohio State football. But until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.